Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat. And today we're going to talk a little bit about myths and misconceptions out there. And we're going to talk about front squats. All right. This got prompted because I got into a little bit of a debate in a training group online on Facebook. And there were lots of people trying to pretend and claim that there is actual scientific evidence that the front squat works more quad than the back squat. And the reality is most of the studies that have looked at this have found they're pretty much equal. A couple have found slightly more activation for the front squat, and a couple have found less for the front squat, right? However, here's the thing. The ones that have found more or less have been very small margins of difference, meaning we're not talking about enough to really matter, meaning it's within the margin of error of the equipment. So in other words, we don't have scientific evidence of this. And people will say, well, what about the biomechanics? What do you mean? Okay, what does the quad do? Quad bends the knee, okay? It extends the knee. Now, it does involve some hip extension to a lesser degree. And I want people to think about that for a moment. Does a front squat bend the knee more than a back squat? No. Only if you choose to go deeper. In other words, the depth of the squat will matter a little bit. Okay? This is one of the reasons people will say, well, box squats may not hit the quads as hard. That's true, because on a box squat, we keep our shin vertical or in front of us. However, if we go to a deeper box, that thing goes away. But the point is, even a box squat uses the quad heavily. It's still a primary mover. You cannot remove that, okay? You cannot remove that. There is no scenario in which you can bend the knee to where it's at 90 degrees and come back up on any form of squatting motion without the quad being very, very, very heavily activated. It's like saying there's a way to bend the elbow while taking the bicep out of the movement. It doesn't work. You can't do it. You can't press without using your triceps. Okay, it cannot be done. You cannot remove the quads from any sort of squatting type movement. We could even argue that a lot of partial movements, conventional deadlifts, good mornings, things like that, that don't even bend the knee as much, they still activate the quads pretty heavily on EMGs. We do know that the amount of knee bend matters, but it doesn't even matter for the entire quad, does it? All right, the upper quad is more concerned with hip extension and some bending of the knee. So the really deep knee angles really only affect the lower parts of the quad, maybe the lower half to a lower third. But it does matter there. So a slightly deeper squat will give you slightly more quad activation. It's not going to be double. It's not going to be something crazy like that. It's going to give you a few percentages more. In other words, that last 4 inches of depth on a full deep squat, it's going to give you a few percentages more quad activation. But it's not going to be something crazy like double or even 50% more. So this idea that the front squat works more quad is ludicrous. Now the idea, you'll hear people say, well, the front squat uses less back, but that's not even true, is it? Right? What they mean is that it uses less hip hinge, in theory, because you have to stay more upright. But it's not even that big of a difference. It's not even that big of a difference. But the lower body activation, especially the quads and things, seems to be pretty similar. At least a dozen studies have confirmed that. Some will bias it slightly more one way, some will bias it slightly more the other. But it's all within 10% either way. Okay, right? It's all within 10% either way, and studies confirm it both ways, but generally it's not statistically significant. Front squats work the quads the same amount. But you'll get people say, well, I feel so much more quad. Well, so what? How you feel doesn't always tell you it's being worked. Doesn't always tell you that. So the data's not there. The biomechanics are not there. When you look at the biomechanics involved with the skeleton, it doesn't have any, there's no reason to think that the quads get worked more. They just don't. Now, people will argue that certain forms of power squats do not work the quads as much because there's more hip. The extra hip doesn't matter. In other words, let's put it this way. If you can Olympic squat with an Olympic squat, 500 pounds, but then when you go to a power squat where you use more hip, you can do 550, you're doing more weight because you're involving more muscles. Those extra muscles don't detract from what the quads are doing. The extra muscles involved let you move even more weight. The quads are still firing. The quads are still a primary mover. The only time it affects quads is if it reduces the range of motion of the knee, which it can, because again, a lot of times when we're power squatting, it's easier to hit parallel as far as your knee angles go, right? But here's the thing. Sometimes squats can be limited as far as building your quads in general, and this would include front squats. It's not just back squats because of the amount of fatigue they generate. Okay, there's a fatigue element. Also, certain people, particularly the fatigue that mounts up for people who have longer femurs, they're more fatiguing. It's harder for them to do certain things due to their levers. They struggle a little bit. And in some cases, we might want some more quad activation. We might want more quad development, but that's why we have other movements. Okay, what do you see me do when I want extra quad work? Okay, what do you see me do? Now, obviously, I can add more speed work. Add more jumping, all that stuff matters, that works quads. But we can do belt squats, and we can do isolateral leg work. What do we mean by there? Split squats, step ups, things like that. One-legged exercises. Why? They're easier to recover from. We don't have the same axial loading. On a belt squat, the spine is not being loaded at all. It's easier on recovery. It's not always easy to get the same range of motion though, because again, a lot of setups can be very difficult. They can be kind of almost injury risky when you get real strong, which is one of the problems I run into. I start getting past 300 pounds, just getting up and down starts to become a risk. Okay, there's issues there, but and it can be issues with your setup as far as reaching depth. Like I'll see people who will do them with a landmine or swinging bar hanging, where it's put up on the edge of a rack. I can't reach depth with that. I can't even get within 2 inches of parallel when I do that. I've tried. It's impossible for me personally, because it changes my movement pattern way too much. So it's actually a great solution if you can get the movement dialed into where you can get depth. Your other options are single leg exercises for the same reason. In other words, you're not going to have anywhere near the same amount of weight on your back. People can say, well, the front squat, you're going to use 15% less on average if you train both. True, but there's a difference between 15% less and 70% less. In other words, a 500-pound squatter, you are not going to be doing single leg exercises with even 300 pounds. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So we dramatically reduce the amount of axial loading on the torso. Makes them easy to recover from. So if you need extra quad development, front squats don't make sense, right? They don't make sense in that regard because you could just do more back squats. Front squatting has its own benefits, and we're not going to get into all that. It's more sport specific, like for Olympic lifting. Okay? Or for building your upper back, but a safety bar does that job with less hassle. So if it's just upper back development you're chasing, the safety squat bar is a better tool than the front squat, right? So ultimately, if you're trying to build more quad and you want less stress on your back, this is where, again, belt squats and single leg exercises come in, because we can continue to they don't work the quads harder than those squats do either. Right? They just let you do more volume without beating up your overall recovery. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.